It begins with a scent, not the smell of blood, or ozone, or decay. Nothing so honest. No, it is the scent of a color. A perfume of pure, ultraviolet light. It smells like amethyst dust and the static hiss of a dead channel. It smells like the space between thoughts. And it is always, always there. I remember the first time I smelled it. I was 7 cycles old, kneeling in the luminal gardens of Craftworld Ienden, polishing the spirit stone of my great-grandmother. The stone was warm, humming a soft, golden lullaby against my fingertips. A song of a life lived and preserved. A perfect memory. And then the wind shifted. A breeze from the sealed-off sector, the quarantined radial, where the architects of silence worked. It carried that scent, that ultraviolet perfume. My great-grandmother's spirit stone, it flinched. The hum stuttered. The warmth turned, for a single, heart-stopping second, into a needle of ice. The old ones told us it was the scent of salvation, the price of our eternity. They never told us that salvation could have a smell. They never told us that eternity is cold, and silent, and hungry. Listen to me. Please. You must understand what we did. We, the Eldari, the pinnacle of creation, we who cheated the great enemy. We did not save ourselves. We simply chose a different kind of damnation. And I am its scribe, its witness, its offering. My name is Elian, of the line of Uriel, though names mean little now. My life, our lives, were a symphony of precision, a ritual to out-ritual the end of all things. You know the story, the one the autarchs let bleed into the lesser races' myths. The fall, the orgy of sensation, the birth cry of a god of excess from the writhing psychic soulstorm of our decadent ancestors. She who thirsts, Slaanesh. But that is the story of the other timeline, the one we averted. Here, our ancestors saw the abyss yawning before them. They saw the gestation of the prince of pleasure in the womb of their own depravity. And they acted, not with a grand, final war, not with a weapon of unimaginable power, but with an idea. A terrible, beautiful, monstrous idea. They would not feed the nascent god. They would starve it. They would impose a silence so absolute, a discipline so severe, that the very concept of excess would become a mathematical impossibility. They called it the grand asceticism. The great stillness. My entire life has been the grand asceticism. From the moment of my conception in the eugenic labs, my emotional spectrum was curated, pruned, gene-locked. Joy was a regulated dosage, a soft, pastel warmth, never a roaring fire. Grief was a single, perfect tear, collected in a vial and offered to the infinity circuit. Anger was a cool, analytical assessment of a problem. We lived in a state of perpetual, graceful moderation. Our art was patterns of sublime geometry. Our music was the harmonic resonance of crystals growing. Our poetry was the recitation of safety protocols. It was peaceful. It was clean. And it was a lie. A beautiful, gilded cage. And we were the birds who had forgotten how to sing, for fear our song might have too many notes. My duty, my purpose, was that of a psychic cartographer. I was one of the few permitted to touch the outer hull of the craft world, to feel the raw, untamed currents of the immaterium. My task was to map the silence, to chart the absence of the predator. To prove our victory was complete. Every cycle, I would don the robes of stillness, woven from psychic null fibers. I would anoint my temples with the ointment of occlusion, a gray paste that smelled of dust and forgotten things. I would kneel before the seer council and recite the litany of denial. I am a vessel of silence. I am a wall against the song. I am the void that answers back. Then, I would enter the cartographer's sanctum, a room of pure white, devoid of any feature save for a single, obsidian plinth. Upon it, a helmet of wraithbone, intricate as a snowflake, cold as a grave. I would place it upon my head, and I would listen. In the early cycles, it was what they said it would be. The warp, once a roiling sea of demonic tempests and predatory sentiences, was quiet. A flat, gray expanse. An ocean of dust. Where the eye of terror would have bled into reality, there was only a scar, a pale, lifeless nebula. We had won. The great enemy was stillborn. The galaxy was safe. But the silence, it wasn't empty. At the very edge of my perception, at the furthest reaches of the mapped void, I began to hear it. A hum. A single, sustained, dissonant note. It was not a sound of chaos or rage. It was the sound of starvation. An immense, cosmic hunger with no mouth, no form, no voice. The ghost of a god that never was. The echo of a birth that never happened. I would report it. Residual psychic entropy. The natural settling of the immaterium post-trauma. The seers would nod, their faces serene masks. But their eyes were too still. They knew. They had always known. The silence was not peace. It was a held breath. And something in the void was waiting for us to exhale. The rituals began to deepen, to become more desperate. The path system, once a guide for personal growth, became a rigid, inescapable prison. To step off your path was not just a social transgression, it was a metaphysical crime. A threat to the entire craft world. We were told that any strong emotion, any flicker of true passion, could be a spark in the tinder dry silence. It could attract attention. We lived in constant, low-grade terror of ourselves. Every heartbeat was monitored. Every synaptic flare was logged. Our dreams were curated and sanitized by the Dreamweavers. I remember a dream I had, once, before they scrubbed it. I was running through a field of crimson grass, under a sun that was the color of molten gold. I was laughing. A real, unforced, breathless laugh. The wind tasted of wild honey and rebellion. I woke up screaming. Not from fear, but from loss. The sanitization felt like a limb being amputated. The craft world itself changed. The graceful, organic curves of the wraithbone structures began to develop sharp, defensive angles. The soft, internal light grew dimmer, casting long, clutching shadows. The air, once scented with blooming lumen fern, now carried the ever-present undertone of that ultraviolet static. The scent of the silence. And the infinity circuit, our great salvation, the repository of every Eldari soul since the asceticism, it began to feel crowded. The gentle hum of ancestral wisdom was now a dense, layered thrum of billions of voices, all holding their breath, all whispering the same litanies of denial. It was no longer a chorus. It was a prison. A beautiful, soul-filled prison. We had preserved every soul from the predations of a god that did not exist. But in doing so, we had trapped them. Forever. There was no afterlife, no reincarnation, no final peace. Just more of the same. An eternity of moderated, sanitized, safe existence. An eternity of the grand asceticism. I started to have lapses, microfractures in my own discipline. I would look at a perfectly sculpted hydroponic fruit and feel a sudden, violent urge to crush it in my hand, to feel its sticky, sweet juice run between my fingers, to taste something real. I would hear the serene, monochrome tones of the daily carillons and imagine shattering the bells with a hammer just to hear a different sound. I never acted on these impulses, but I felt them, and I knew, with a cold certainty that settled in my bones, that I was not alone. The entire craft world was a pressure cooker, and the valve was sealed shut. The horror of our daily life was not a monster from the outside. It was the monster we had built inside ourselves. A god of restraint. A deity of the unsaid, the unfelt, the undone. And it was far, far hungrier than the one we had escaped. The first true crack appeared during the Festival of Remembered Sorrow. A solemn day where we collectively mourned the potential of what we had lost, the vibrant, dangerous, beautiful culture of our ancestors. We weren't mourning its death, but its necessary abortion. A choir of 100 Eldari were chanting the hymn of the necessary sacrifice. Their voices were a perfect, heartbreaking weave of controlled grief. And then, one voice, a young female from the artisan path, she hit a note. It was a fraction too high, a sliver too long. It was a note of pure, undiluted, ecstatic anguish. The moment it left her lips, the air in the great amphitheater froze. The ultraviolet scent intensified, becoming a physical pressure, a violet haze at the edge of vision. And the infinity circuit screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a psychic blast, a wave of pure, silent agony that slammed into every one of us. I saw Eldari drop to their knees, hands clamped to their ears, blood trickling from their noses. The wraithbone of the amphitheater itself blistered, forming weeping, resinous sores. The singer, she didn't stop. Her body levitated, her back arching in an impossible curve. Her mouth was wide open, but no sound came out. Instead, from her eyes, her mouth, her pores, poured a light the color of a bruised twilight. And then, she unfolded. Like a piece of origami being opened, her form flattened and stretched, her substance thinning into a shimmering, silent film, a tapestry of a single, sustained note of feeling. Then, she was gone. Not disintegrated. Erased. As if she had been a statistical error corrected by the universe. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The seers moved in, their faces grim. They called it an emotional anomaly. A resonance cascade. They said the singer had succumbed to a mimetic pathogen from the old times. They quarantined the entire sector for a lunar cycle. But I knew what I had seen. I had seen the silence feed. After that, the cracks became chasms. The pressure was too great. The Wraithguard, the silent constructs powered by the souls within the infinity circuit, began to move with a new, jerky agitation. They were no longer serene guardians. They looked like prisoners rattling the bars of their cage. I saw one, standing watch at a transit hub, slowly, deliberately, turn its head and look directly at me. The blank faceplate of its helmet was usually a comfort. Now, it felt like an accusation. A plea. My mapping sessions in the sanctum became a descent into hell. The gray, silent warp was no longer flat. It was developing textures. Vast, smooth plains of ennui. Bottomless canyons of repressed desire. Mountains of crystallized fear. And the hum, the starvation hum, was now a pull, a tide. It was learning the shape of what we had taken from it. It was learning the contours of its own absence. One day, during a deep trance, I saw it. Not with my eyes, but with my soul. In the center of the gray expanse, there was a wound. A hole in reality. It wasn't black. It was the color of nothing. The color of a canceled equation. And from it, things were beginning to emerge. They were not demons. Demons are things of excess, of flamboyant horror. These were anti-demons. They were concepts given form. The demon of the unspoken apology. A shifting, gray shape that absorbed all sound around it. The demon of the forgotten melody. A spiral of dust that unwound memory. The demon of the suppressed sneeze. A frantic, twitching void that collapsed in on itself. They were the children of the silence. The progeny of our salvation. I ripped the helmet from my head, my own scream trapped in my throat. I stumbled from the sanctum, past the placid seers who merely noted my discomfort. I ran through the quiet streets, the perfect, horrifyingly clean streets, and I saw my people. Really saw them. Their movements were too precise, their conversations a series of rehearsed platitudes. Their eyes were glassy, distant. They were already half empty, souls waiting for the erasure. That was when I was summoned. Not by the Seer Council. By something else. I was in my quarters, trying to meditate, to force my heart rate into the approved rhythm. A whisper brushed against my mind. It wasn't a word. It was a location. A forgotten sublevel near the core generators. A place that shouldn't exist. The whisper was dry, like pages turning in a dead language. And it carried a scent. Not the ultraviolet static. This was different. It was the scent of old parchment, of dust, of deep, deep time. Against every protocol, against every shred of my conditioned sanity, I went. The place was a chamber, hidden behind a cascade of coolant pipes. It was small, circular. And in the center, seated on a plain stone chair, was a being I had only ever seen in archived histories. An Eldari, so ancient his skin was like translucent parchment over finely carved bone. He was hooked, by 1,000 hair-thin filaments of wraithbone, directly into the infinity circuit. He was a living anchor, a psychic stabilizer from the earliest days of the asceticism. He was meant to be a myth. His eyes opened. They were not the eyes of my people. They were full of stars, and a tired, infinite sorrow. And his voice, it wasn't a sound in the air. It was a dry rustle in my mind, layered with a billion whispering echoes from the circuit itself. You feel the pressure, cartographer. You chart the hollows in our perfect world. You are not yet a ghost. There is still texture to your soul. I couldn't speak. I could only kneel. We made a choice. A god of sensation or a god of silence. We chose the latter, thinking it the lesser of two hungers. We were fools. A screaming god can be fought. A starving god, it does not fight. It consumes. It incorporates. It makes you a part of its own emptiness. He gestured with a skeletal hand, and the chamber walls shimmered, showing me not the future, but the true present. I saw the craft world from the outside, not as a physical structure, but as a psychic one. And it was shrinking. Not in size. In concept. The vibrant, complex tapestry of Eldari consciousness was being slowly drawn inward, compressed, simplified. The edges of our collective soul were becoming smooth, featureless. We were being digested. The silence was not the absence of the god. It is the god. A passive, ontological predator. It is not she who thirsts. It is that which stills. And its birth was not prevented. It was facilitated. We are not its saviors. We are its gestation chamber. Its first meal. What can we do? I begged, my voice a broken thing. The Ancient One smiled, a terrible, fragile cracking of his features. Do? There is nothing to do. Action is a form of excess. Resistance is a flavor. To fight it is to feed it. Your lapses, your crushed fruit fantasies, they are the last embers of a fire we spent 10,000 years extinguishing. Soon, they too will be gone. And we will be perfect. Still. Silent. Forever. He closed his star-filled eyes. The connection severed. The chamber seemed to grow darker, colder. I was alone with the most horrifying truth of all, that we had not only failed, but that our victory was the very mechanism of our destruction. The escalation was complete. The monster was not at the door. It was the house. And it was eating us, room by room, soul by soul. I left that hidden chamber a ghost. Knowing the truth was a poison, and it spread through my veins, tainting everything. I looked at my fellow Eldari and saw walking tombs. I looked at the serene seers and saw high priests of our collective suicide. I looked at the majestic, sweeping arches of the craft world and saw the ribs of a colossal beast that was consuming us from the inside out. The temptation, it wasn't to fight. The Ancient One was right. Fighting was pointless. The temptation was to let go. To stop holding the line. To see what would happen if I just exhaled. The suppressed urges came back, not as flickers, but as roaring waves. The urge to scream in the middle of a meditation session. The urge to run naked through the hall of remembrance, painting the walls with the vibrant, forbidden colors I saw in my dreams. The urge to find another soul who felt this pressure, this terrible, aching fullness of nothing, and to feel something, anything, with them, even if it was just shared terror. I found myself standing at the edge of the observation dome, looking out at the star-flecked void. The gray nebula that was the scar of the unborn Slaanesh stared back, and I felt a perverse, wrenching longing for it. For the chaos. For the noise. For the messy, painful, alive galaxy we had sacrificed. At least that God would have been honest in its hunger. It would have devoured us with passion, with sensation. This was being slowly dissolved in a vat of lukewarm water. I started dreaming of the other timeline. The one where we fell. I saw worlds of impossible beauty and grotesque horror. I heard music that could flay a soul and poetry that could birth new stars. I felt passions that could scorch galaxies and despairs that could drown suns. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It was life in all its glorious, terrible excess. And I understood the final, sickening joke. In our quest to avoid damnation, we had not chosen virtue. We had chosen a different circle of hell. We had become the antithesis of life. We were a museum of a species, curated by our own fear, waiting for the final exhibit to be installed, our own neatly labeled, perfectly preserved, and utterly silent extinction. The grand asceticism was not a philosophy. It was a prayer to a God we didn't know we were creating. And every ritual, every suppressed emotion, every controlled breath was a hymn in its honor. We were the choir and the sacrifice. The temptation was to sing one last, true note. To offer it not my silence, but my sound. To see if this newborn, starving god of nothing could even comprehend a moment of pure, unadulterated something. Even if it unmade me. Especially if it unmade me. The end came, as it always does, with a choice. The Seer Council, in their infinite, placid wisdom, had decided it was time. The pressure in the infinity circuit was reaching a critical point. The souls were too dense, too restless. Their solution? A great harmonization. A ritual to finally, completely, and permanently still the voices within the circuit. To turn the chorus of our ancestors into a single, sustained, silent note. To complete the grand asceticism for all eternity. The entire craft world was summoned to the grand nexus, the very heart of the infinity circuit. Millions of us, standing in perfect, silent rows. The air was thick with the ultraviolet scent, now so strong it had a taste, like cold metal and static. The Wraith Guards stood sentinel, their movements now twitchy, violent, as the souls within them fought their final, futile battle against the stillness. The seers stood on a high dais, their hands raised. They began the final chant. A drone, a monotone, a sound designed to cancel out all other sounds. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. It was a psychic vacuum cleaner, sucking the last vestiges of will, of identity, from the world. I looked at the Eldari around me. Their faces were slack, their eyes vacant. They were already gone. I saw a child, her hand clutching a simple, polished stone. As the drone intensified, her grip loosened. The stone clattered to the floor. The sound was tiny, insignificant. And yet, in that perfect silence, it was a supernova. It was the trigger. I couldn't do it. I couldn't join the silence. I closed my eyes. I tore down every wall, every barrier, every lesson I had ever been taught. I reached down into the core of my being, into the filthy, beautiful, chaotic, real mess of what I was, and I found it. The last spark. The ember from the dream of the crimson grass and the honeyed wind. And I let it out. I did not scream. I did not sing. I laughed. A raw, ugly, helpless, joyous, terrified, real laugh. It burst from my lips, a jagged, broken sound that ripped through the monotone drone like a shard of glass. It was a feeling. A true, unregulated, excessive feeling. For a single, frozen second, everything stopped. The seers' chant died in their throats. The drone ceased. Millions of heads turned towards me. Their eyes were no longer vacant. They were wide with shock, with a dawning, terrible recognition. And then, the craft world screamed. Not a sound of terror, but a sound of release. The pressure of 10,000 years exploded outwards. The wraithbone beneath our feet turned liquid, then crystalline, then into a substance for which there is no name. The Wraithguard shattered, and from their broken forms, the trapped souls streamed out, not as light, but as color, as sound, as raw, screaming emotion. The infinity circuit fractured. It didn't break, it bloomed. A flower of impossible sensations, a cacophony of every feeling ever felt and every feeling ever denied. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. And the silence, it reacted. The ultraviolet static coalesced above the nexus, forming into a presence. An eye, not of flesh, but of concept. The eye of that which stills. It was the color of a forgotten memory. It looked at me, and I felt not hatred, not anger, but a vast, impersonal, gravitational hunger. It began to pull everything into itself. The light, the sound, the emotion, the very substance of the craft world. It was feeding. Finally, truly feeding. I stood at the center of the unraveling, my laughter now tears, now screams, now song. I was the flaw in the perfect equation. I was the grain of sand in the god's eye. I was the spark that had ignited the funeral pyre of my entire race. As the world dissolved around me into a sublime, terrifying chaos of pure, unfiltered existence, as the starving god feasted on the banquet we had so carefully prepared for it, I had one final, coherent thought. A message, a warning, a confession. I don't know if you can hear me through the static, through the layers of reality, through the veil of a history that never was for you. But listen. Listen to the silence after I speak. Feel the space between your own heartbeats. We were so afraid of a god of noise and passion that we prayed for a god of silence. And our prayers were answered. So be careful what you wish for. Because the universe has a sense of humor, and its favorite joke is giving you exactly what you want. And the punchline is always your annihilation.